what it took and all the cool things about that. How many of you got an opportunity to talk to Jared on the air when he was down in the islands? Yeah, a few of us did. Okay. Was it on CW?
It wasn't me.
All right, well, we'll turn the time over to Jared.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this little adventure I went on. This is my friend Ryan. He would come by the shack every morning and afternoon on his way to and from school, and he always had a name for me. I only spoke a little bit of English, but he always had a name for me, and he'd kind of chuckle a little bit. And later in the week, I asked him what the name was for his chicken, and it was the same name he'd been calling me all week. So I think that's why he was chuckling a little bit. So one of the questions I got a lot, when I decided to do this was why? Why would you go do this? And I'd kind of say, well, why not? First, views like that every day for a week were pretty nice. That was pretty tolerable. Some people buy things, four-wheelers and boats and cable TV, and I like to buy adventures, experiences. I think some of the best stories are written between the covers of a passport. That's kind of my philosophy. So I like to travel and see the world, and this was admittedly a little bit of a harebrained idea, kind of almost on a whim, but I'm not really one of those types of guys that says, oh, I wish I could do that. I just go and make it happen. So I had a lot of fun doing it. Another question people ask is, how was I able to do this? I'm not independently wealthy by any means. But it just kind of all worked out. I had an opportunity to go to a business trip to Sydney, Australia. And so work was paying for my travel there. And so I started looking at opportunities somewhere along the way or in the vicinity of Australia, and this worked out really well. I could actually go to Tahiti and make a stop there for 10 days or 9 days for no more than the round trip to Sydney, Australia. So that gave me a good landing point, and then went from there. And it really, certainly DXpedition is not free, but it's not really any more expensive than any other international vacation that you might want to take, say, to Europe or whatever. And we did have a lot of donations and sponsorships that helped defray a portion of the cost. We're not making money on this deal by any means, but helped to cover a lot of the costs. So as I was researching where I might go, I looked at a lot of different places. Again, in the vicinity of Australia, I looked at Christmas Island and Cocos Keeling Island. They're off the west coast of Australia in the Indian Ocean, just really small islands out there in the Indian Ocean. I looked at Nauru, which is a volcanic island in the South Pacific, Rotuma. A lot of different options, but I'd been collaborating with my friend John, K7CO. He'd been looking at going to Timor-Leste, which is north of Australia. It's between Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, a really small country, about 2 million people. And we were trying to get licensing. We've been trying for several months to get licensing. It just wasn't happening. So I eventually connected with Grant, KZ1W, and he was looking to go to the South Pacific, and we collaborated. We both had researched Marquesas, and we decided, let's do it. Let's go to Marquesas. And so I committed there, and about an hour later, we got an email from the authorities in Timor-Leste. Said, hey, we'll give you a license. So I had a really tough decision as to where to go. Eventually, even though Timor-Leste was in higher demand, I decided to go to Marquesas. Just worked a little bit better, and I'm glad that I did. There's been about 15 people to Timor-Leste between then, a few months ago, and today. So Marquesas Island, it's number 68 on the Club Log Most Wanted list of 340 DXCC entities. A pretty high in demand. Number 35 for Europe. Europe's about the opposite side of the planet from the Marquesas, so in high demand there. Had not had really a notable operation in 3 years, so the recent demand was pretty high. Also, it was a fly-in location, so I didn't have to charter a boat or anything to get there. There's a once daily flight from Tahiti that goes to the Marquesas Islands. We found a good location on the island of Nukuhiva, which is the largest island in the Marquesas Islands chain. In this small village on the north shore, it's pretty much the only location where we could actually have a bed and kind of a roof over your head, and operate from the North Shore where we'd have propagation to most of the world. So it's a really quiet village, Hatihio village, about 200 people, really quiet. We had a place where we could rent some bungalows about 150 feet from the beach, which was great for vertical antennas. We put them right on the salt water, and they weren't game busters. And they were tolerable accommodations. It wasn't 5-star resort by any means. And they had a really great restaurant there in town. Pretty reliable power. We didn't have to use generators. It was about 230 volts. It fluctuated up and down a little bit, but enough that it worked, and it was on the whole time, which was great. One interesting,
Power generated on that island?
It's a fuel generator plant. Yeah, and it worked really pretty well. It's just when everybody would turn on their lights in the evening, our voltage would drop a little bit and up and down. So, one thing that's interesting is the Marquesas Islands. The island chain is in its own time zone. It's GMT minus 9 hours 30 minutes. There's only about 2,000 people that live in that time zone. No modern operating system supports that time zone. That caused us some interesting difficulties. We found that we'd been on the air for about 3 or 4 hours when we realized that all of our logs were being recorded with the wrong time. And so we took a little bit of creativity to fix that problem. We ended up setting all of our computers to UTC time, and we thought and lived in UTC time. It was kind of melted your brain trying to do all of the time shift things. So it's about 3.5 hours, or was 3.5 hours from here. So it wasn't bad traveling there either. No significant jet lag. So the Marquesas Islands, they're located about halfway between here and New Zealand, kind of right smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 9 degrees south of the equator. That meant that the sun kind of went straight over the sky, and it would set behind this big volcanic spire, and you'd say, oh, it looks like it's starting to get evening, and it was like a heartbeat, and it was pitch dark. So the sun went straight down, and it was pretty incredible to have the sun going down at 6 o'clock, and at about 6:40 you could see the Milky Way and all the stars. It was just really incredible. There's probably 20 light bulbs in the whole village, so pretty neat to see that. So I want to give just a little bit of a tour here. Hopefully this will work of where we went. So just from here, I went to LAX, and then about an 8-hour flight to the island of Tahiti in the South Pacific. Papeete is where we landed. We spent 2 nights there. We just wanted to make sure everybody was there. We kind of grouped the whole team there, and then took the flight to Nukuhiva. Spent a day on the island of Moorea, which was just incredible. And then 850 miles back the way that we came, to the middle of nowhere, to the island of Nukuhiva. So our Marquesas Islands chain, those are kind of all of the islands in the chain, and Nukuhiva. It was a little interesting flying there. You're in this little prop plane, and they only fill it about half full, because they say if they fill it all the way full, they won't have the fuel to get there. So, and there's nothing between Tahiti and there, so it makes you think a little bit. So we landed on the north end of the island. On the north end is the airport, and that's it. There's nothing else there. It's kind of the desert side of the island. And then, even though the island's only about 10 miles from the airport to this village Hatihio where we were staying, it took us 2 hours to get there. Just was a real windy road up over the volcanoes and everything. I'll show some pictures here in a minute. So we stayed in the village of Hatihio here. We had the school and the restaurant, the church here, and then these 5 little buildings here, that's where we stayed. 1 bungalow for each of the operators. The one closest to the beach was our radio shack. You can see that some pretty notable terrain around this village. All sides, except for the north, were kind of surrounded by pretty notable mountains, but it was really the only place where we had paths to the north. Most of the other DXpeditions had been on the south side of the island and really struggled to get to, well, pretty much anywhere. If you look at an azimuthal, or if that's how you say it, mapped, and with Marquesas centered, see this ring here. It has not all that far really to North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Eastern Asia, and Japan. which meant that we could hear all of them at the same time, which made things really interesting. Lots of people calling at the same time. Europe up here was a little bit further. You know, it's mostly a polar path or through North America to get to Europe, and we struggled a little bit getting to Europe. And because of terrain, South America, we thought South America and Australia might be a little more difficult. South America was a little difficult. Australia, we worked them all day. Any time of the day we could hear Australia and New Zealand stations calling.
And that was kind of towards your back, right?
It was kind of, yeah, it was kind of with the path. It was pretty much due west. So South America was due east. Australia pretty much due west. North America, yeah, pretty much just northeast. Europe, northeast. Japan, northwest. Mm-hmm.
So going back to that three-dimensional topography map, going towards Australia, you had some pretty sizable
Yeah.
mountains to get over, but it didn't seem to matter.
It really didn't, and we thought that it would be the most difficult path for us was to Australia, but they were loud all the time. And Europe, just because the polar path was the most difficult for us. We worked several Africa stations, even though Africa was really the opposite side of the planet, but worked several Africa stations. Uh-huh.
Did you look at the takeoff angle from your antenna, kind of how
Yeah.
it compares to the mountain height?
Yeah, we did, and that's really, I think, what hurt us for Europe was that we had just a little kind of the point out there that we had to go over, and we think the takeoff angle, plus the polar path, plus the solar conditions, plus there were several other factors with Europe that made it difficult. But yeah, that was something that we looked at. But we really had no other options for this island, or really in the chain, that would work.
Do you remember what they were?
The other locations?
Takeoff angles?
Oh, Europe, I think we figured was 11 degrees. Is kind of
Where the mountains were to the west?
about that. yeah. Probably a little higher due west. So yeah. So we landed in Nukuhiva. This is the airport. There's not a whole lot to it. Just a little tiny building. And we started to take the drive across the island as we went up, started to go up the mountains. It was incredible. The scenery was just amazing. Just kind of more rugged than I even imagined. We dubbed this the Grand Canyon of Nukuhiva. And as we gained elevation, we saw something I wasn't expecting, pine trees, forests of pine trees. It was incredible. This is the plateau in the middle of the island. It looked like something you'd see in Montana. There were cattle ranches out down here in this valley. We weren't expecting that, but it was just stunning and incredible. And then as we went kind of through this high forest on the plateau to the kind of more towards the south side of the island, then it became very tropical, kind of rainforest. This was our first view of where we'd be staying. The church, our bungalows were here in the trees close to the beach. So this is our radio shack. Don't be deceived, it looks like it's brick. It's not. It's actually like a wood paneling to hide the fact that the termites had pretty much eaten everything. But it worked. It worked pretty well. In the background here are the bungalows that we stayed in. Here's Grant setting up the crank IR with our hammer. We didn't have room for a hammer in our bed, so he's using the local hammer to stake things in. Inside our bungalows, this is the bathroom. A little hard to see there. Very open, which was good because it made circulation. It's very hot. There's two handles on the shower there. No. It didn't matter which one you turned, it was cold water, which was quite awakening after a 6-hour shift and you're coming into the shack at 2 in the morning and run that cold water over you. Ocean water was wonderful. Yeah, it was nice. It was bathtub. It was really nice. The biggest issue we probably had was bugs, especially the sand flies. You'd walk kind of along the beach or anywhere and they'd jump out of the sand and bite you, but you don't feel them when they bite. It's about 2 days later that you start to feel them, and then it lasts for about 2 weeks. I'm still itching my legs. It's been 2 weeks since I've been on the island. So I learned after the first night, to move the bed away from the wall so that the bugs wouldn't crawl into your bed. And the second night, I learned to point the fan on you and keep the sheet on. Otherwise, you just got eaten alive at night. Another, I won't call it an issue, there were chickens everywhere. Everywhere, tens of thousands of chickens everywhere, and so we had cock-a-doodle-doos 24 hours a day. We all brought earplugs, which was great. We had the first few days we had a goat right next to the shack that was just all day long. It was kind of annoying, and one day the goat disappeared, but goat showed up on the menu at the restaurant. And he was delicious. But it really was quite tolerable conditions. It really worked out pretty well. It was very hot, it was humid, but there was a constant breeze. Made things work pretty well. This is Yvonne. She's the mayor of the village. She owns the restaurant and the bungalows that we lived in. One thing that we found surprising is we showed up and we had Wi-Fi in the bungalows. And we actually, right next door to the bungalows was the post office, and it provided a hotspot for the village. And so that was nice to have internet in the shack. It was $5 an hour, but it worked out pretty well. So our team was myself. I had no DXpedition experience. I just liked radios. I thought this would be fun. Grant, Kilo Z1 Whiskey, operated sideband. He'd been to the Austral Islands before on a DXpedition. So Grant and I first decided to do this, and we thought, wow, there's so much demand, but it'd be great to get a CW operator. So we had Keith sign up with us. He did CW and a little bit of sideband. He'd been to Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho, Curacao, a few other big contest operations. Then his friend Don decided to come, VE7DS. He did only CW. I don't think the guy owns a microphone. Botswana, he's been to Campbell Island. 2 years ago there was ZL9HR, great big DXpedition to Campbell Island. He was part of that and several other operations. So even though I'd never met any of these men before, we all showed up in Tahiti. We had a great time. We all got along really very well. The equipment we used two Elecraft K3 radios. Those were our primary radios. Worked great, wonderful rigs. I took my ICOM 7000 with the Signal Link. We used it for RIDI, for digital modes. I had two amplifiers, my Elecraft KPA 500 and a Tokyo High Power 550 watt amplifier. For antennas, we had two crank IRs. I'll talk about that in just a minute. With some extension, we use those for 80 and 40 meters primarily. Three 207-inch whips for 20 through 10 meters. We had a fiberglass pole that we rigged for 30 meters for wire vertical. One thing that we found early, 10 and 12 meters were amazing, especially in the day, but we had really bad interference. Even though we had filters, interference between 10 and 12 meters. And so the guys just rigged together this dipole for 12 meters, strung it up in the trees, made it out of speaker wire, and it was awesome. We actually had it on an antenna switch, so you could switch between the vertical and the dipole, and there was no noticeable difference. So that saved the interference because we had one vertical and one horizontal polarized, and it worked awesome. We worked thousands of people on that little speaker wire dipole. So we did have band filters for every band to help reduce interference. Didn't totally get rid of it, but really helped.
What kind of
what's that?
What kind of interference?
Just cross noise band interference, yeah. So there'd be times where CW would be operating, you could hear them. Yeah. Because we're about 150 feet from the beach, we knew we'd need a lot of coax. Now we had a spreadsheet before, and it outlined everything that everybody was going to take. We had to fit everything in our baggage, and there were baggage restrictions. And so I had two 55-pound duffel bags. So I was limited to 110 pounds total. So I had two 55-pound duffel bags, a big case with my amplifier that was 36 pounds, and my laptop case. About 155 pounds that I was lugging around with me through the airports, which was fun. So we had the spreadsheet. We knew what everybody was bringing. We showed up, and everybody brought an extra antenna, which was wonderful, and extra coax, which was great because we needed it. So about 700 feet total of low-loss RG8X coax. So there's a photo. This is our 30-meter fiberglass vertical. Again, it's just fiberglass pole, and then you hang wire from it to make a vertical. In the background is one of the whips right on the beach. This is a photo of one of the crank IRs. If you're not familiar with the crank IR, it's a kind of an interesting design. It has a crank on it that allows you to tune. I came out one day to crank it, and this lizard crawled up my arm and crawled back onto the antenna. So has a crank. Again, the wire goes up and back down with some leader line. And so to tune a band, you just crank the top crank to a quarter wavelength, and then it has a radial line that comes out here. You crank the radial to the appropriate length to tune it. So it works sweet. Once you get it figured out, you can change bands in about 10 seconds. You know, crank this to a mark, crank this to a mark, and you're done. I had a lizard, we were at dinner one night, and I had a lizard fall off the ceiling, hit me in the hand, and fall in my dinner plate. Which was fun. They were everywhere.
So when you watch the Geico advertisement,
That's right. Here's a quick tour of where we were at. Interestingly, there was like this really nice new glass phone booth on the beach, and like in the middle of nowhere. But so just a little tour here, and I have to preface this by telling a little story. I'd been operating, and there was a station, Papa Yankee 7 Zulu Zulu, from Brazil, and this guy had called over and over and over again. He wouldn't listen. He wouldn't wouldn't take directions. I would logged him about 3 times, and he kept calling, and I was just really frustrated. And I finally just stood up, threw my headphones down. I'm done. I pointed to Grant and said, "You take over." And we all did that at least once. We all got a little frustrated. And so he started working, same thing, a lot of difficulties with this operator. And we had a list, short list. We only had 3 stations on our crap list. Okay? And so we put him on the list just because he was not really helping. So Grant took over. So that was just kind of, went out to the beach, had a little Zen moment with the surf and calmed down, and took this little video. So I'll kind of walk you through this. So that's one of our whips there. That's 10 and 12 meters. See, the surf was pretty significant. I mean, at times it was actually good we were that far from the beach, because the surf was so loud we couldn't have heard if we were right on the beach. Another one of our whips here for 15 and 20 meters. In the back is the other whip for 10 and 17 meters, or 30 meter vertical right there. Now our coax, we ran through the trees and up and over the road, rather than trying to go across the road. The crank IRs were in the yard here to the left, a little fast forward motion here. So here's Grand operating. See, he's still trying to work that guy. I got a chuckle about that. Here's Don working CW, where he might be asleep there too, I'm not sure. And so he's finally supposedly logged him again. I thought it was kind of funny, and I came over to our crap list, and there's Papa Yankee 7 Zulu Zulu. So it was kind of fun. So that's just a little bit of kind of scene of what our operation looked like.
So you deleted those guys from your log?
We didn't. We were tempted to. We didn't end up deleting them. We discussed that, but there were certainly some stations that caused a lot of frustration. So propagation was just incredible most of the time. We really, pretty much 24 hours a day, we could have really good contacts to some place. If you found the right band, it would work. Now, the middle of the day, about 10 o'clock a.m. to about 1 o'clock was a little bit slow, and about 1 o'clock, 10 and 12 meters, I would explode. And then about midnight to 2, 3 a.m. was also a little bit slow. That should have been a good time to Europe, but it just never opened. We'd call and call and call, and just the opening that had been forecast, and we think because of the terrain and some other conditions, wasn't there. Now, while we were there, we saw the largest sunspot in 24 years, which was both great, good and bad. It was great because we had really, really amazing openings to certain places, but we also had a few radio blackouts. I was working on 10 meters, and CW was on 12 meters. It was in the afternoon. We had just a huge pilots, both of us, just working hundreds of people. And I remember I called a Whiskey 2, and his response was like, Whiskey 2, you're 5, and I just heard his volume go down. And I thought, wow, man, he must have just blew up his amplifier or something. And then I called QRZ, and the pilot was a whole lot quieter than it had been. I could hear these 6 stations and 7 stations, and they suddenly started to get quiet. And I just listened for a second as everyone's calling, and America was gone. And I could hear all of these JA stations calling. They were loud, and over the course of about 3 or 4 more seconds, all of the JAs disappeared, and it was absolutely silent. And I turned around, I looked at the CW operator, and he looked at me, and we both shrugged and went sightseeing. A total radio blackout. We turned through all the bands, couldn't hear a single signal on any band. Lasted for about an hour, and then it took off again. So interesting how that happens. Like somebody threw a blanket over the world. Again, I talked about Europe, South America, and the issues there. 80 meters was probably our biggest disappointment. Just had really high local noise, about S7 noise on 80 meters. We just couldn't quite isolate it and get rid of it. Couldn't figure out where it was coming from, somewhere in the village. And so it made it really difficult to make contacts on 80 meters. We worked out, myself and Grant, on sideband and RIDI, we did 6-hour shifts. So we'd work 6 hours at a time. The CW guys did about 4 hours, so I never slept more than about 4.5, 5 hours at a time. But it worked out pretty well for our schedule. We had 2 stations on the air pretty much 24/7, with just little breaks when there were blackouts. We shared a meal, all of us together, once or twice. Besides that, we had stations running. So our total results, 27,236 QSOs. Of those, 11,663 distinct call signs. Really high unique percentage. We were pretty happy with that. We knew we gave a lot of people an opportunity to get Marquesas in their logbook. We worked the contest at the end of the week. We had 2,300 contacts in the contest in about 22.5 hours. We didn't work the whole contest. We took some time for RTTY, worked a few other bands, and then we had to end early. We couldn't work the whole time. We had to end to go catch our plane home. But we definitely won Marquesas because we were the only operators there, so that's good. I'll be getting a certificate for that one. That'll be good. We were in the same zone as Hawaii, Zone 31, and so we had some competition there. But everybody that contacted us, it was a multiplier for them, which kept us really busy. So overall, we worked 133 countries or DXCC entities. We worked all 50 states on 7 different bands. So that was pretty exciting. Worked every continent, including Antarctica. We had Radio India 1 Alpha November Tango from Australia. The Russian base there contacted us twice. So a total of 150.5 hours of operating time. That's on the air, working. Our average 181 contacts an hour. So that's 1 contact every 20 seconds for 7 days straight. This is a map of just kind of a marker for every entity that we worked. So you can see we worked everywhere there was somebody that could listen to us, we were able to get them in the log. Our numbers, you see 80 meters was really disappointing, 126 contacts total. We probably didn't give it as much effort as we could have, but it was really slow. It was frustrating. So we ultimately made the decision to forego 80 meters to give people opportunity elsewhere. Because when you're averaging, 1 contact every minute or 2, it's just where you could work 4 or 5 a minute on another band. It was hard, even though the demand for 80 meters was there. 20 meters was really our money band. We could go to 20 meters any time of the day and make contact somewhere. 10 and 12, again, we're just really, really hot most of the time. And when 10 and 12 were open, you could work anywhere in the world. I was on RTTY and worked 6 continents in 8 or 9 calls. Okay, so I worked everywhere in the world: Brazil, Europe, East Coast of U.S., Japan, Australia, Africa, all in just a few calls. So we're a great location for working the world. So a few lessons learned. We had the question of whether the contest was worth it. Because we did it at the end of the operation, we had of our 2,300 contacts, about 800 were duplicates, band mode duplicates from previous in the operation, which was fine. We expected that. But the question became, if we hadn't worked the contest but instead worked other bands, could we have given more opportunity? I don't know. It's a question I haven't answered yet. But there was just wondering whether it was worth it to do the contest. We know we lost a lot of contacts with band changes. We figured probably every time we changed bands, it was probably about 200 contacts that we lost, just because it took time to go out there and tune the whips or change the crank and move coax around. We just, I should have better planned coax and antenna layout and switching coax. We had a few times, in the middle of the night, someone stumbles out there and unplugs the wrong coax, and the other operator says, "Oh, what happened to my station?" Things like that, and it was difficult and some tension in the team among that, and we never really fully figured it out. But that's one lesson that I learned that next time I'll do a little bit better. I also learned that we should have better isolated our phone station from our CW station, just because with phone we sometimes get a little bit loud and it would frustrate the CW guys trying to listen to these weak signals, and we're right next door. Should have moved them into separate rooms. Put bug repellent on early and often. Should have learned that lesson. Found we had a really good place to operate, good QTH, but it was really difficult to Europe. And Europe was difficult not only because of the distance and the propagation, but there was a lot of intentional QRM, a lot of operators that would call blindly, meaning they couldn't hear you, but they're just calling, and you'd answer them over and over and over, but they couldn't hear you, but they're still calling, which means it made it difficult to get anybody else in the log. Just really poor discipline. You'd call it for like the Delta Ocean 2 in Germany, and you get Italy Kilo 9 calling over and over and over again. So that was tough. Like I said, we all at one time were working Europe and said, "Screw it, I'm done. I can't take Europe anymore." Another thing I learned is promise nothing. We had a lot of times where we'd say, "Oh yeah, we're going to work 20-meter RIDI this evening," or "Yeah, we're going to go to 17-meter sideband." And you turn around and see that the CW guys were working a great run on 17 meters, so you couldn't work that band. So we learned not to promise anything. We had great plans of how we were going to work it, and we threw it all out when we got there. Just changed, and we went with what worked. Another thing that was really, really helpful to us, we used N7SMI for logging. It's contest logging. It has something called the check window, and it has a database of all of the active HF operators in the world. What's really cool about it is you can put in a partial call sign, and it will tell you all of the call signs in the database that match that. This was especially helpful for Japan, because we would have hundreds of Japan stations calling at one time. And all Japan stations almost all start with Japan Alpha, Japan Echo, or Japan Radio, and they're almost all 6 characters long. And so you'd have a big Japan opening, and you'd say QRZ, and you'd hear Japan. That's what it sounded like. And so sometimes instead of trying to get the first 3 characters, Japan, Alpha, Japan, because it was just a big mush, you'd listen for the last 3. So if I heard, say, Alpha Delta Yankee, I could type in Alpha Delta Yankee, and this would show me all the calls that have those 3 letters together. And there's 2 Japan. There's Japan Alpha 0 and a Japan Alpha 2. Well, I didn't hear the first 3. I just heard Alpha Delta Yankee. The one at the top is actually indicating that he is already in our lodge somewhere. So I could say, even though I didn't get the whole call, I'd say Japan Alpha 2, Alpha Delta Yankee, you're 5-9, and 95% of the time I was right. Okay? So it saved a lot of repeats by just getting a partial call and trusting the database and seeing people that were already in your log. That was really helpful. Fortunately, the Japan stations were they're so polite. They would just, you'd say, "Japan, stand by, I want to listen for Australia and New Zealand," and it would be silent. It was so amazing, and other places not so much. This is our filter stack. So we had one filter for every band. We kept them in one place, so you'd never have more than one station on the same band at the same time. So you just check out a filter and put it in line. This is a photo I took just on my computer while I was working RTTY, just kind of to show out how absolutely silent the bands were at times. We would work a lot of stations where it wouldn't even move the needle. It wouldn't even budge the needle. They were so weak in there, but the band was so quiet that you could put them in the log. And then this is one of a screenshot of what a pileup looks like for Japan on RTTY. So each of these pairs of little lines there is a separate station. So maybe, 30, 40, 50 Japan stations all calling at the same time. Those are all bunched up in the middle, so I'd work the edges. People just, I'd work up 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. and I would just work the edges. Most people all just called right here in a big mass in the middle, and you could never decode something there. But I worked out a good system on RTTY. Kind of the standard on RTTY is if you can work 60 an hour, about 1 a minute on a DXpedition, it's pretty good rate, and we beat that by a long ways with the system we set up. So just a few stories, anecdotes, maybe some tips for those of you that like to chase DX. And then just the pile-ups were incredible. There were a few deer in the headlights moments, I'll admit it, when you'd call, CQ and it's just this mush, that's the technical term, mush of stations calling, and you're trying to decode even a letter out of that big mush. I'll let you listen in just a minute to some of this. 12 meters, one time we worked 12 meters for 9 hours straight and never called CQ. 9 hours straight, over 1,200 contacts in a row on 12 meters. It was incredible. I was really happy with our rates. Kept up, especially on phone. At the beginning of the contest, in N7SMI, it shows you your current rate, your hourly rate, and a 10-minute rate. I had a 10-minute rate of 430 an hour, so it's over 7 contacts in a minute, per minute for 10 minutes, which was pretty exciting. I'm like, yeah, woo, this is so much fun. Had an hourly rate of 308 an hour, so well, that comes into 5 to 6 a minute. One thing I really found when the DXpedition is working split, and we almost exclusively worked split operation, meaning we're listening separate, different from where we're actually calling. When I'd say up 5 to 10, I usually worked only up 5 or up 10. Occasionally I'd work people in the middle. But what you find is, as I'm tuning around and listening, as soon as I work a particular station, say up 5, the good DXers hear that, and they call their nits because they want to get me. So I'd work one station here, and then I'd have 50 people all up 5. So I'd go up 10, worked one up here, and then everyone would pile up there. And I worked occasionally in the middle. I found if I worked in the middle, if I was up 5 to 10, that would cause QRM into the edges. Just people had sometimes really wide signals. And so I found if I worked people in the middle, everyone called in the middle, but there was noise on both edges, so it made it harder. If I was up 5 to 15, I'd work anywhere in between.
For Jared,
Uh-huh.
so that's where you were listening.
Uh-huh.
So were you doing this to try to pull somebody
Mm-hmm.
out of the pile?
Yeah, like I said, most of the time I'd be like up 5 or up 10 or up 15, occasionally in between, because there'd be people that would call in there. But yeah, sometimes you have to do the Mickey Mouse until you get them tuned in and can hear them clearly to work them. But yeah, one thing I found is when I'm calling really, really fast, I just say QRZ or up 5 to 10, so really quick so I can get them in the log. That moment in time when I'm saying Tango X-Ray 7 Golf, I'm listening up 5 to 10, you can know that that's when I'm turning the dial, okay? Because it's hard to pull out stations while you're tuning. So if you're working a pile up, when the guy gives his long call, go somewhere else. Because it means he's tuning the dial, right? If you call where the last guy was, you're probably not going to get there. Just 40 people will probably beat you, unless you're really, really loud. And that's the key. Be loud or be where the DX will be, not where they're at right now.
Were you using your amplifier all the time, or did you ever
Yep.
turn on better stuff?
Yeah, we ran the amplifier all the time with the 2 stations. So 500 watts, about 300 watts out on RIDI, just because it's full duty cycle. We didn't want to melt things down.
I was amazed to hear how many people you were saying. 5 to 10, they're still around the center frequency trying to call it.
Yeah.
People be telling them they're up 5 to 10.
Yeah.
Trying to call you.
Yeah, and the thing is we could hear well enough. Yes, there were people that would call on our calling frequency, and most people would chase them off. There's some QRM and interference there. There were really only a few times where I had to really stop, and because I knew that the people I was calling couldn't hear me because of interference. But most of the time we could hear well enough, and I think we were loud enough that we just blew out anybody that was calling on our frequency. Another interesting thing that I found is we'd stop quite often to call for places that were more difficult. So we might have a really big North America pile up, and we say, okay, everyone stand by, I want to listen for Europe only, up 5. So I might have been working up 5 to 15 or up 5 to 10, So then say, everyone stop, I want to listen to Europe, only up 5, because I want to make sure I can hear them if they're calling. Okay, now South America only, up 5. And I'd work a few Europe or South America. Then I'd say Tango X-ray 7 Golf, listening up 5 to 10. Well, where am I listening right now? Not up 5, because about 300 people are all calling on up 5, because that's where I just worked stations. I'd be listening up 10 to nobody. It was incredible. Nobody listened to that. Nobody kind of caught that. Occasionally people would start to figure out my pattern, but I'd go up 10 and then I could work some really weak ones, which was nice. Another thing is really listen to the DXpedition operator. She'll give you hints. Sometimes I was working up 5 to 10 and the pileup was just so big. I'd go Tango X-ray 7 Golf, listening up 5 to 10, up 12, up 12. And the guys that are listening, I'm up 12, I work 2 or 3 of them real quick, and then I go back into the mayhem of the pileup. So listen, there's a lot of times I do listening up 5 to 10, just like that, just to give them a hint of where I was at.
So when Dan and I and Kelly were in the shack trying to catch you, I was at the thing, and I was going up 5, and we were listening on those bands to see if people were calling you there to try to figure out who you were working and where you were.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we figured it out one time, I think. Because, you know, when you're on that 7,000, you have to do that.
Hit the button and
I don't remember where we were when we got you, but I don't think we were up 5 or 10. I think we were like 6 or 7.
Yeah, could have been. And
Anyway, but it was kind of interesting because we could hear people calling you.
Yeah.
You know, and we were also listening on those to see if we could find where people were calling you at.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the strategy is if you're loud, you want to work where the guy worked the last one. If you're not loud, you want to be where he's going to work the next one. Find a hole somewhere and work lots of really weak stations that way. As I said, everybody experienced some frustration, compounded with a little sleep. Talked about the issues with Europe were sometimes really frustrating. People wouldn't listen. When you call for a partial, they'd just keep calling. Anyways, we handled it, I think, pretty well. Like I said, everybody took a moment sometimes to step away. I only had one minor meltdown, I think, on the radio. I was calling for Europe and South America only, and I had a Whiskey 1 that just kept calling. And he could hear me. I'd say, Whiskey 1, stand by. Okay, I'll stand by. South America, Europe only. Whiskey 1. He was so loud. And I just stuck with it. I'm like, I'm not going to let this guy bully me into putting him in the log. So I went for 3 or 4 minutes, and this guy just would not stop calling, even though I'd tell him I knew he could hear me. And so I finally got so frustrated. I said, okay, everybody, I want you to go to qrz.com, look up Whiskey1, whatever his email address, send him an email and tell him if he doesn't shut his trap and listen, he's never getting in the log. And I looked over my shoulder, and the other 3 guys are like, oh, you go. Anyway. So I don't know how many emails the guy got, but it was my only real meltdown. Had one Japan station that he was super, super loud, but his audio was just, it was unintelligible. And he was really impacting the rate, but I couldn't make out any characters. I finally called for a Japan Alpha 2, and he called. So I worked 3 or 4 Japan Alpha 2s. I narrowed it down to where it was just him, and I took about a minute to make out his call sign over and over and over because his audio was so bad. I kind of scolded him. I said, you've got to fix your audio. You're killing us. We had another funny story. I can't remember the exact call sign. I'll use the call sign of one of my team members as an example. But I had, say, Victor. We were working on the pilot line really loud. Victor Echo 7 Delta Sierra. I said, okay, Victor Echo 7 Delta Sierra, you're 5'9". Nothing. Victor Echo 7 Delta Sierra, you're 5'9". No response. So I thought, well, maybe I heard it wrong. So I said, Victor Echo 7 Delta. Nothing. Victor Echo 7, silence. I'm like, okay, that's weird. Okay, the Victor Echo only. No response. I'm like, I know the guy's in there. I heard him so loud. So I decided, Victor only, starting Victor only. There's got to be somebody in Canada listening, right? Nothing. So, well, I don't know where he went. QRZ, Victor Echo 7, Delta Sierra. So that's how it goes sometimes. Just want to let you listen a little bit to, this is a recording that was made here in Utah of the pilot. And you have to keep in mind when you hear this, the recording is from here, so he's only hearing the stations that are here. I was in this pileup, I was working in Japan and Australia and some Europe that he couldn't hear here. So the pileup here is probably a little even smaller than what we were experiencing. But to give you an experience of what we listened to for 8 days. Can you hear that? Hello? These are people still calling. Now I checked the logs. While this is going, I'd work 2 stations. Everyone's calling, but I'd work 2 stations in the meantime. So I'd work 2 stations in there too. And then, anyways, it seems like just mush, but after a while you get pretty good at pulling out. You kind of tune your mind into one and then pull out that call sign, which your ability to do that decreases the longer you're on the radio. I remember working 20 meters at like 1 in the morning, and it was Europe, and my brain was just mush. I said, I've got to go sleep. I can't. They're there. I just can't pull them out. So what next? What do I want to do next? Well, first order of business is QSL cards. This is my current stack of mail, and about 1,000 more that have been requested online. So I've got a lot of mail to send. I bought $800 worth of stamps yesterday, so got a lot of mail to send. I'm thinking about a few. Actually, I want to go back. I want to see. I just want to cover this real quick. There was kind of this debate we had of calling by the numbers. Grant, who worked phone with me, he would call for 1s only, 2s only, 3s only, and work his way through all of the numbers. So you'd only call if that number was in your call sign, which is interesting. Then you get like a 7 kilo 4, a 9 whiskey 1, which had 2 numbers, so they had an advantage. But I didn't like working that way because I got too frustrated trying to discipline the pile up. If I called for a 4 and I get a 6, I'd have to say the 6 stamp. It just seemed to slow down my rate. Grant did it really well, so I opted for a wider split to work stations faster that way. Grant favored rate, getting him in there really quickly, where I take a lot of time to work partials, really weak stations. So my rate was lower, but I know I made a lot of people happy because I got some weak ones in there. I was there one time, and the CW operators were making a band change, and they said, we told everybody that we're going to 10 meters. Watch this. So we went to 10 meters, hit the key, CQ, Tango X-ray 7 Golf, up, one time, the band just exploded with CW. It was really cool to see. Okay. So what I might do in the future, I don't know. We'll see how things shake out sometime in the next year or so. I've looked at maybe going to Cambodia. Not really highly demanded, but one of my favorite places on the planet. Cocos Keeling Island, again off the west coast of Australia. Nauru in the Pacific. I've turned down some offers for some really incredible DXpeditions. One to Chesterfield Islands, which is number 24 on the most wanted list. Had an opportunity to go there fall of next year, but the time 3 weeks away and some pretty notable money because you have to get a ship to go there was just too much for me. I was invited to Africa to do a contest in DXpedition for a couple weeks. So we'll see how it all works out. But we're researching one entity, me and a couple other guys, that we're hoping will work maybe end of next year. Can't tell you exactly which one it is yet, but here's a little hint. So if you think you missed something, there wasn't a whole lot to see. It's a really highly demanded island that we hope to put on. This is our QSL cards. I have QSL cards for those of you, many of you I know that worked. Ted's not here, Gary's not here, KF7 Zulu, Kevin, Cordell's not here, Dan, I've got your card, Kelly, Spencer, Garth, Shirley and Kent, Tyler, Guy, Theo's not here, K7JL, I don't know if he's here. If there's anybody else that I made a contact with, come up. I've got some extra cards. I'd love to give you one of our QSL cards. Okay, so be sure you come get these when we're done.
Jared,
Uh-huh.
is there something we could do as a club to help you with those QSL cards, getting them out? Is there a day we could have an assembly line? What could we do?
I'm going to see today, I've got about our first 50 out for some of our sponsors and donors. I'm going to see how it goes. But yeah, I might have a QSL card party at some point in a week or so. If we'll see how long it takes to get them. So thank you, though. I appreciate the offer. I do have to say thanks to our sponsors. You know, when I started this, I thought, wow, you know, if we could get a few donors, maybe a couple sponsors, maybe a few $100s worth to help us, that would be amazing. And I was just really overwhelmed with the generosity of sponsors, individuals. I know there are several in this room that made individual donations. Thank you. It just really makes things like this possible and makes me want to go do others when there are people that support it. So thank you very much, and appreciate the club itself for their generous sponsorship.
On your higher frequency verticals, did you deploy radials or did you just ground it to the saltwater?
Yeah, we had radials for all of our verticals. I should have taken a picture of one. The whips worked really, really pretty well.
How many
So,
radials did you
so we had 2 radials, one off each side, running parallel up the beach. We had each vertical, we had it tuned for 2 bands. So 10 and 12 for one, 10 and 15 and 20 for one, and then 10 and 17 for the other. And we had a system where the radial has to be tuned, but we had the guys that we brought this little alligator clip kind of thing for the radial. So we had like 10 meter radial tuned, and then we had wire that went out further. So if we went to 20, you just kind of jack up the whip and then plug in the radials on both ends, and you're done. So a matter of seconds to change bands. So it worked really well. Yeah, so two radials. For the crank IRs, we used one with the crank, which worked fine. With the salt water, I didn't think there was much of a loss there. So you've got pretty good ground plane with salt water. Are there any other questions you guys have?
Maybe this is a funny question, but I know how the work's good on this end. How do you guys, do you use RIT or do you use 2 VFOs?
It's not RAT. Yeah, we'd use two VFOs. So yeah, so we're transmitting at one place and just listening. So it's exactly the same way you do with 2 VFOs. It's just opposite. We're transmitting in one place, listening everywhere. You're transmitting in the pile up and listening to me in one place. So it takes a little bit to wrap your head around how to do that with the radio, but yeah. Uh-huh.
The people on the island there, have they worked with people coming there to do radio DXing? Did they know what you were doing there?
There had been one other DXpedition to the place where we were at, a Russian DXpedition a few years ago. So they did have an anticipation. I'll tell you, it was a little, we weren't sure what to expect. There's very, very little information about the island itself. It's not like you can Google bed and breakfasts on Nukuhiva, right? I mean, in the translation bureau, we did Skype calls, you know, like $3 a minute several times to the proprietor of the restaurant, really rough French translations. And so we weren't quite sure. We were hoping at least that we'd have a bed when we got there, and we did. But yeah, they had an idea of what we were doing. They didn't ask any questions. It was just island life, very, very laid back. You know, we showed up at the bungalows, and the guy says, "Oh, you're here for bungalow?" I said, "Yeah, here's your keys." And it's like, that's all. No check-in. Our transportation, you know, they dropped us off, and they said, I said, well, what do we owe you? And said, I don't know. What did they say? I said, I'm not sure. They gave us a quote. I could look it up and said, don't worry about it. Just pay us when we pick you up in a week. You know, that's kind of how the sentiment was. It's not like we were going to run away. They could find us. So the rental car agency was like, what's your name? Okay, here's your name. Here's your keys, because you're not going to drive it off the island. They'll find you. Any other questions you guys have? Okay, thank you very much.